All right, so let's review skills 1 through 7. I got some quick notes here for each skill. Skill 1, we're going to use a number line. Skill 2, if the signs are the same, you get a positive answer. If the signs are different, you get a negative answer. Skill 3, we're going to multiply straight across. This is multiplying fractions, multiply straight across. If you're dividing, we'll need to do the reciprocal of the second fraction first. Skill number 4, adding and subtracting fractions. We need to get a common denominator. And you will need to use a tricky one to get a common denominator if there is not already one there. Skill 5, combining like terms. We want to get the x terms together and the number terms together. We don't combine the x's and the numbers. Skill 6, distribution. Multiply each term if we're multiplying. Divide each of the terms in the problem if we're dividing, or subtract each of the terms in the problem if there's subtraction involved. Skill number 7, order of operations. You might have learned PEMDAS. I think GEMDAS is a much more apt acronym for us to use in algebra, where we change that P for parentheses instead to G for grouping, since in algebra we see a lot of different ways to group things together, and parentheses is just one of those different ways. So let's take a look at some of these questions in here. To do question number 1, we're going to use a number line. So I'm going to start here at the -20. So on my number line, I've got a point there at -20. The operation here tells me what direction to go. If it were subtracting, I would be moving left on the number line. If it is adding, like it is, I will be moving to the right on the number line. And this last part tells me how far to go, or how many spaces to count. So I'm going to go to the, starting from that -20, I'm going to count 13 spaces towards the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And there's my answer, -7. All right, question 2, similar setup here. So I'm going to start at -11. I'm going to go to the right since it says plus. And by 2 spaces since it says 2. So starting at that -11, 1, 2 spaces, I end at -9. All right, question 3. So now I'm multiplying. So I'm going to, first of all, look at the signs. I got a negative multiplied by a positive. So the signs are different. So I'm going to have a negative answer. Now I'm going to look at the numbers. 7 times 2 is 14. So my answer will be -14. Skill question 4, still the same skill. This time I got a negative multiplied by a negative. Those both have the same sign, so it's going to give me a positive answer. You don't need to type plus. Actually, I think on these problems it'll confuse WAMAP if you do type the plus in there, even though it is a positive answer. Now I am going to look at the numbers. So 5 times 8 is 40, positive 40, but I don't need to write the plus sign. Question 5, division. It's the same skill, dividing 6 divided by -2. So first I look at the signs, +6, -2. Those are different signs. So I'm going to get a negative answer. And then the numbers 6 divided by 2 is 3. Question 6, also dividing, negative divided by a negative. So these are the same signs. So my answer will be positive. Again, this probably will confuse WAMAP if you type the plus sign in there, but I do know it is a positive answer. Now I can look at the numbers. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Question 7. So now I'm dividing fractions, and in order to do division of fractions, let's just look at one part at a time. I am going to rewrite this as a multiplication problem. So I'm going to change the second fraction. It's got to be the second fraction. You don't get the same answer both ways. So I need to take that one I highlighted in yellow, the second fraction, and I'm going to flip it. I'm going to trade the numerator and denominator, give them opposite spots in that fraction. So this is going to change to multiplication, and I'll put in the second fraction, these numbers are moving around. So the 12 goes to the top, 25 goes to the bottom. That whole fraction is still negative. That doesn't change. So now I have 10/9 multiplied by -12 over 25. Now I can multiply. It's like our notes up here say, when I'm multiplying, we just go straight across. Top times top, bottom times bottom. So straight across the top, 10 times negative 12 is negative 120. And on the bottom's 9 times 25 gives me 225. The directions asked me to give my answer in simplest form, so I will need to reduce. When I look at these two numbers, the negative 120 and the 225, I recognize that they ends in 0 and 5, which means that they are both divisible by 5. So I divide both of them by 5 to reduce. Maybe you recognize something else, and that is totally fine. You don't have to do 5, but that's what I recognized. So when I divide both of those numbers by 5, I end up with negative 24 over 45, which is reduced. But I want to double check and see if it can be reduced any further. So when I think about this a little bit more, I see that I can divide by 3. Both of these numbers divide by 3. 24 divides by 3, and 45 also divides by 3. So I'm going to end up with negative 8 over 15. Now, you could have done this in a different order, so we got the same answer when you're reducing. Maybe you noticed that both of these two numbers, the 120 and the 225, could be divided by 3. Or maybe you don't notice that, but you just start trying numbers on your calculator. And so you start with small numbers, like dividing by 1, dividing by 2, dividing by 3 would be the first thing that would work without giving you a decimal answer. That's fine. You can do this in the other order. There's nothing special about the order I did it in. I could have, at the very beginning, divided negative 120 and 225. I could divide them both by 15. I didn't recognize that, and so I didn't. But if I had, I would have got completely reduced in one step. Okay, question 8. Now I'm subtracting fractions, so I need to have a common denominator. And in this case, I did start with a common denominator. Both of these fractions have a denominator of 12. So my final answer is going to have that same denominator. And all of my arithmetic is going to happen with the numerators. Negative 7 minus 5. So negative 7 minus 5. You can use a number line if you need. That's going to give me negative 12. And then again, I need to give my answer in reduced terms. And so here I notice I got a 12 on the top and a 12 on the bottom. So I know that 12 divided by 12 is going to give me 1. But since they have opposite signs, it's going to be negative 1. So in this case, my answer is not even a fraction when I reduce it. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it'll still be a fraction. Question 9, again, is adding fractions. This time I don't have a common denominator. I've got different denominators. I got a 9 over there and I got a 6 over here. So what I need to do is get a common denominator. So I am going to ask myself, what is a common multiple for 9 and 6? One way to do this is you can just multiply the 9 and the 6 together, and that will give you a common denominator. You could use 54. That will work. I prefer to use the least common denominator. I would rather work with smaller numbers. And so I know that both 9 and 6 will multiply into 18. And so I'm going to use 18. The catch is here I'm going to have to figure out what do I need to multiply each of those by to get it to turn into 18. Right? So 9 is going to multiply by 2 to get 18, and for 6, I'll need to multiply times 3. So I'm going to use a thing called the tricky one. So I'm going to copy the two fractions here one at a time. So here's 2/9, and then I'll just get 1/6 ready for use in just a moment. So 2/9, that top fraction, I need to multiply times 2. So I'm going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by the same thing. All right, I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2. This will make my fraction look different, but since this red part I just made here, 2 divided by 2, that basically equals 1. Right? It doesn't look like a 1, but 2 divided by 2 does equal 1. So I'm multiplying by 1. And anytime you multiply a number times 1, you get the exact same number as your answer, right? So because of the way I've written this, it's not going to look like the same number I started with, but it's going to equal the same thing. It's going to be equivalent. So now I multiply straight across the tops. 2 times 2 is 4. And straight across the bottoms, 9 times 2 is 18. So that's going to be my new fraction, the new version of the first fraction. And now For the 1/6, I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom of that fraction by 3, so 3 over 3. And that again is a tricky one. So this will give me an equivalent fraction, but it will look different. So this is going to be 3 over 18. Okay, now I'm going to rewrite my problem using these two new fractions. It'll be 4 over 18 plus 3 over 18. Let's see if I can get this to just copy and paste down here. Add. Okay, so now that I have a common denominator, all of my arithmetic happens on the top. So I know that my answer is going to have that same denominator of 18, and I just add straight across the tops. 4 plus 3, which is 7. 7/18. Can I reduce that? No. There's nothing that I can divide out evenly. So 7 over 18 is going to be my final answer. All right. Question 10. All right, so we got another adding fractions. These don't have common denominators either, so let's just jump straight to this. So I got 7 over 10, and I've got 4 over 15. What number could 10 and 15 both multiply into? Oops, what am I writing? 10 times something, and for the other fraction's got a denominator of 15. 15 times what? Well, I know that they both go into 30. All right, this would be 10 times 3 will give me 30, and 15 times 2 will give me 30. If you wanted to use a different number as your common denominator, you certainly could. You could just multiply the 10 times the 15 and get 150. You could use that as a common denominator. I don't like using big numbers, especially like 150. So there's nothing wrong with it. You'll still get the same answer in the end, but more than likely you'll have to do more reducing of your final answer. So just be aware of that if you're going to use a bigger common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this first fraction by 3 over 3. And I'll just set these both up ahead of time. I'm going to multiply that second fraction by 2 over 2. So 7 times 3 is 21, a denominator of 30. And for the second fraction, 4 times 2 is 8. 15 times 2 is 30. So I'm going to add 21 over 30 plus, whoops, my mistake. This was a negative 7/10 in the first place. That's what the original problem was. We can't forget about that. That'll give us a wrong answer. Okay, so I should have negative 21 over 30. And that's not going to copy, is it? Okay, so negative 21 over 30, and add that to 8 over 30. So I've rewritten the problem, so both fractions have a common denominator. New denominator will be 30, or the denominator of the answer will be 30. And then on the top, negative 21 plus 8, that's going to be negative 13. And negative 13 over 30 does not reduce. I know that because 13 is a prime number, so you can't ever reduce with prime numbers. Question 11 is a new skill, skill 5, combining like terms. So I need to keep the x's together and combine them, and the numbers together and combine them. So I've taken the original problem, I rewrote it, I highlighted the two terms that have a y on them, the negative 14y and the negative, 14y and the negative 4y. I'm going to combine them together. So I could rewrite the problem so they're next to each other. I didn't, but that is something that is helpful for people sometimes. So 14y minus 4y is going to give me 10y in the end. And then the two that I highlighted in green, those are my numbers, positive 11 and negative 14. I'm going to add those together. 11 minus 14 gives me negative 3. And that expression is my final answer. It's going to have two terms. You have a y term and a number term. Okay, question 12 is the distributive property or distribution, and we studied both all of these, multiplication, division, and subtraction. This one is just multiplication. So I'm going to take the 5 that is outside the parentheses, and I will multiply it onto both terms that are inside the parentheses there. So I'm going to do this one at a time. So 5 multiplied by z, that's going to be 5z. and then 5 times negative 12, that'll be negative 60. And that's it. Again, I have my final answer does have two terms, the z term and the number term. They're not like terms, so I can't combine them with one another. Question 13, also distribution and also also multiplication, even though I do have a negative number this time. So I'm going to take that negative 8. I know it's a negative 8 because the negative is to the left of that 8. If this was a subtraction problem, the minus sign would be touching the parentheses, and it's not. So I am still multiplying. So I'm going to take that negative 8 and multiply it onto each of these terms. I'll multiply it onto the negative 7x. I'll underline that. So negative 8 times negative 7x, those will have the same sign, so it'll be a positive. 8 times 7 is 56, and there's an x, so I'm going to keep the x as part of this term. Next, I take that negative 8 and multiply it onto the 1. Those have opposite signs, different signs, so my answer will be negative. 8 times 1 is 8, so this will be a minus 8. And then lastly, I take that negative 8 and multiply it onto this last term here, the negative 1y. And those have the same sign, negative 8, negative 1y, so my answer will be positive. So I'm going to put that plus sign in here first. 8 times 1 is 8, and there's a y involved here, so I got to keep that y as part of my final answer. Okay, so this answer has 3 terms. An x and a y are not the same. I mean, they're both letters, but they're different letters, and so I can't combine them. So I'll just keep each of those terms separate. The plus and minus signs is what keeps the terms separate. Lastly is question number 14. So this is order of operations. We're going to use GEMDAS. And when I look at the problem here, I've got 17 minus 4 times negative 10. The parentheses are just keeping that negative 10, the negative and the 10 attached and separated from the 4, so I don't get confused and think I'm subtracting. So the operation that I'm looking to put in the correct order are that subtraction and this multiplication that I've just highlighted. The negative on the 10 is not an operation. That's just telling you it's a negative number. So which one of these do I do first, subtraction or multiplication? Well, my order of operations says I do grouping symbols first. Inside the grouping symbols here, there is no operation. There are parentheses. Sometimes people get confused by that, but inside the parentheses, that's the group. Inside the parentheses, there's no operation. It's just a negative number there. So, okay, it's a negative 10. Great, let's move on. Exponents for the E, there aren't any of those. Multiplication and division are the next ones, so I need to do that green multiplication as my first step. So I'm going to rewrite the problem, 17 minus, and now I'm going to do that multiplication, 4 times negative 10. 4 times negative 10 says a positive 4 and a negative 10, so those are opposite signs, so I get a negative answer, negative 40. But now I got a double negative because there was a minus sign, right? This minus sign is that yellow minus sign from the original problem. And then the negative 40, that came from that multiplication part, the 4 times negative 10. So I have 17 minus negative 40. We got to pay attention to all the little details and not say, oh, I already wrote a minus sign and then forget to write another one. There should be 2 minus signs in a row. So if we think about this from the perspective of a order of operations, what's next? Well, there's only one operation left, it's subtracting. So I have to do subtraction next, right? So I could use a number line to help me here. I would start at 17 on the number line, and then that yellow highlighted minus sign means I'm going to go to the left on the number line, and I'm going to go left by how many spaces? By negative 40 spaces. So on a number line, that negative sign on the 40 is like a reverse card in Uno. So even though the problem said minus, I should go left, and I got the reverse card on that 40, and so I'm going to switch back and move to the right. So start at 17 on the number line and go to the right by 40 spaces. Or if you prefer, you can say, well, a double negative is the same thing as adding. We'll just take those 2 minus signs and combine them into a big plus sign, 17 plus 40. Final answer of 57.